All right, so bundle up, folks, because today we are taking a deep dive into winter.
Ooh, sounds cozy.
It is. And you know what's interesting is our source material. We're actually going to be looking at a beginner English learning podcast.
That's right. Easy peasy spoken English.
Yeah,
And we're going to see what we can learn about language and culture and maybe even some science along the way.
I like it. So this episode kicks off with some vocab, words like cozy and snowman and scarf.
Yeah.
What comes to mind when you hear those words?
I mean, you hit the nail on the head with cozy, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, bundle up. I'm thinking about warm blankets and a fire and maybe even a cup of hot cocoa.
I like the way you think.
Mm.
Now, I wonder, though, is that connection between words and feelings, is that universal? Or is it
Yeah.
different in different cultures?
That's a great question. I think certain feelings are universal, but I think the specific things that they make you think of can definitely be affected by your culture.
Yep.
But really, the big thing is that when you're teaching a language to beginners, it's not enough to just teach them the words. You have to teach them the feeling, the atmosphere.
Right, paint that picture.
Exactly.
So then they go into winter activities, building a snowman, ice skating, and my personal favorite, staying cozy indoors. Let's be real, sometimes the best winter activity is just avoiding the cold altogether.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that. Curling up with a good book next to the fire, it's hard to beat.
Yeah. But they use this section to talk about something interesting when it comes to language acquisition, shared experiences. They use the example of drinking hot chocolate because, it's something that people do all over the world to warm up.
Yeah.
So how does this all tie back into language?
Well, think about it. Drinking hot chocolate, that transcends language, right? It's something we all do, and it's something that you can connect with no matter what language you speak. So for someone who's learning English, when they hear about this familiar activity, it really reinforces that idea that communication is about connecting with others over these shared experiences.
Oh, that's cool. I like that. So then the episode moves on to some listening practice. They have a simple conversation about the weather. And I thought it was interesting how much emphasis they put on that.
Yeah, it might seem basic, but learning to talk about the weather is actually a huge step when you're learning a new language.
Really? Why is that?
Well, think about it. When you can have a conversation about the weather, it means that you're not just understanding individual words anymore. You're actually understanding how to use grammar and vocabulary. You're actually comprehending and responding in real time.
So you're putting it all together.
Exactly. All the pieces. And that's a big deal when you're learning a new language.
Okay. So then they go into a grammar section. And I have to admit, I was surprised by how much depth they packed into this, even though it is for beginners.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they break down phrases like, it is cold and I wear, like winter clothing.
Yeah.
And it seems simple. But when you're first learning a language, that stuff is super important.
Totally. And I thought it was really smart how they introduced these grammar concepts in the context of winter. It just makes it so much more relatable and memorable.
Right. And it makes it easier to learn because you're not just memorizing a bunch of rules.
Yeah.
You're actually seeing how those rules work in a real-world situation.
Yeah. Learning by doing.
Exactly. And that brings us to the fun winter facts section.
Ooh, yeah. My favorite part. Did you have a favorite fact?
I mean, they were all great, but I think the one that really stuck with me was that no two snowflakes are alike.
Oh, that's a good one. I've always loved that fact. It just makes you realize how incredible nature is.
It really does. And, there's a whole world of science behind how snowflakes are formed and why they're all different.
Oh, I know. It's amazing how much complexity there is in something so seemingly simple.
Yeah, it's like this episode. On the surface, it's simple. It's for beginners. But when you really dive in, there's so much to learn.
It's true. We've already uncovered so much and we're just getting started. So stay tuned because in the next part of our deep dive, we'll be exploring even more about what we can learn from Easy Peasy Spoken English.
I can't wait. This is fun.
I know, right?
Let's do it.
So we've talked about how powerful simple language can be, and we've talked about the importance of shared experiences in language learning. But how does this all come together in the podcast?
Well, I think one of the things that they do really well is that they introduce learners to different aspects of culture through these winter-themed examples. Like building a snowman or ice skating or drinking hot chocolate.
Right.
It's not just like random activities. These are all things that people do in lots of different countries to celebrate winter.
Oh, that's true. It's like a little glimpse into different cultures.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when you're learning a new language, it's not enough to just learn the words and the grammar. You really have to learn about the culture too.
Yeah, you have to understand the people who speak the language.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this podcast does a really good job of weaving those cultural insights into the language lessons.
It's like they're getting a mini cultural immersion experience.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes me think about how language and culture are just so intertwined, you can't really separate them.
Right. You can't have one without the other.
Exactly. And it makes me think about how they use the winter theme to teach grammar concepts.
Yeah, I was really impressed by that.
Right. They take these phrases like, it is cold and I wear, winter clothes,
Hmm.
and they break them down. And it just seems so simple,
Mm-hmm.
but it's
Mm-hmm.
so effective because it helps you to really understand the structure of the language.
Right. It's like you're not just memorizing a rule, you're seeing how it works in a real context.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the keys to language learning.
So it's not just about memorizing, it's about understanding.
Totally. And it makes me think about the fun winter facts section, that no two snowflakes are alike.
Oh, yeah. I love that fact.
It's just amazing, right? It's this scientific marvel, but it's also just like this really beautiful idea and just makes you want to learn more about snowflakes and how they're formed.
It does. It makes you appreciate the beauty and the complexity of nature.
Absolutely.
Mm.
And it makes me think about how, we talked about how simple things can be so powerful.
Right.
And I think that's true for language too. Even a simple beginner's podcast
Mm-hmm.
can teach us so much.
Yeah. We've already learned so much from this one.
And we're not even done yet, so stay tuned because in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to talk about some other things we can learn from easy peasy spoken English, things that you might not expect.
Ooh, this is exciting. I can't wait.
Let's do it.
I never thought I'd find so much depth in a beginner's podcast.
Right. And it's like we said, sometimes the simplest things can be the most surprising.
Exactly. So now I'm wondering what other hidden gems are out there? Like, where else could our listeners go to explore these ideas?
Well, if you're interested in language learning, there's a ton of stuff out there. Apps, classes, even just traveling to a new country.
Oh, yeah. Travel's the best.
But even without going that far, you could start by just paying more attention to the language you hear every day.
Okay, like what do you mean?
Just listen to how people talk,
Yeah.
how they say hello, how they tell stories, how they, express their emotions.
Oh, interesting. So it's like turning everyday life into a language lesson.
Exactly. And you can do the same thing with media, like watch movies in different languages, listen to
Mhm.
music from different cultures,
Oh, yeah. I love doing that.
right? And reading, too.
I've been meaning to read more books in translation.
It's a great way to experience a story from a whole new perspective.
It is. And speaking of experiencing new things, we should talk about art. Like how exploring different art forms can help you understand different cultures.
Absolutely. Music, dance, visual art, even food.
Ooh, yeah, food is a good one.
It's all about experiencing a culture through your senses.
And it all comes back to those shared experiences that we were talking about.
It does, and it's a reminder that we can connect with people from all over the world through art and language.
It is. This whole conversation has really made me want to be more mindful of the language I use.
Me too. It's so powerful.
It is. So as we wrap up our Winter Wonderland deep dive, what are some of the key takeaways you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Well, I think the biggest one is that simplicity doesn't mean shallow, like we saw with this podcast. Even something designed for beginners can have a lot of depth.
Yeah, don't underestimate the simple things.
Right. And I think another takeaway is that it's really important to connect language learning to real-world experiences.
Yeah, like make it relevant to your life.
Exactly. And finally, I think we've really seen how interconnected language, culture, and critical thinking are.
That's true. They all work together.
They do. And I think that's something to keep in mind as we continue to learn and grow.
I agree. Well, this has been a fantastic deep dive. Thanks for joining us, everyone. And until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep the conversation going.